Hi, Alex and Bahar, along with our listeners today. Welcome to our second UGovern Planning Plus Property podcast. UGovern stands for the Urban Governance Research Network and is an academic platform to build, share, and communicate research activities in the field of urban governance and planning. The platform was initiated by Professor Dr. Tunita Sonkok within her framework of her chair of urban governance and planning at the University of Amsterdam, and is supported by a Center for Urban Studies, Sea Grant XL. The main aim of UGovern is to connect academics, practitioners, and communities who work in the field of urban governance to create an interactive platform to discuss and collaborate on research. As part of this platform, the Planning and Property chapter members initiate a variety of projects, including webinar series, podcasts, and early career seminars, which are in collaboration with a wide range of academic, public, and property industry partners, open to participants and attendees worldwide. Chapter members explore the dynamic landscapes of urban governance in an increasingly property-led planning environment and discuss new ways of policymaking, planning, and urban development from a critical perspective. Alex and Bahar, we're excited to have you both join us today, and we look forward to discussing your past navigating academia and industry. Welcome both.
The podcast today will be divided into three themes. The first theme of today's podcast is about overcoming obstacles, geographies, and challenges, where we'll speak about the panelists' experiences in overcoming the obstacles, geographies, and challenges throughout their PhD and after their PhD. Thereafter, we'll talk about networking and skills, and lastly, perceptions of the academic industry. But before we start, I'd like to give some time for both panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Bahar. If you could just shortly explain what your PhD was focused on and what you're currently doing within your life or within your professional experience. So Bahar, feel free to go.
Thanks, Andre. I'm Bahar Sakizlioglu. I'm an assistant professor at IHS, which is Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. I am currently teaching at the Housing Master track, and my PhD was on displacement experiences of low-income residents in gentrifying neighborhoods of Istanbul and Amsterdam. And I did my postdoc afterwards at Leicester University, and that was on gender geographies of gentrification. And right now I am basically building my career on carrying these to a new agenda that I'm working on, which is on social reproduction and urban transformation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aleksandra Djurasovic. My background is in various fields. I did my bachelor's in landscape architecture and psychology at UC Davis. I did my master's at CUNY, more specifically City College of New York, the class of Michael Sorkin in urban planning and design, and completed my PhD at Hafencity University Hamburg in urban planning. Even though my PhD can be more closely specified, I think it falls more in urban geography field than planning, because as a planner, I was interested in planning processes, but I was much more interested in how socioeconomic ideology impacts formation of planning systems. And geography that I focused on was Southeast Europe, more specifically Bosnia. So I analyzed trajectories of changes in planning systems from 1945 until today. And then there was a special focus on the city of Mostar, which is a city in Bosnia, one of those case cities that has been analyzed and overanalyzed because it's a divided city. It's been divided since mid-90s. And then currently I'm working for the state of California. I'm a specialist with the Department of Housing and Community Development, living in Sacramento.
Thank you so much, Aleksandra, for that introduction, and Bahar too. Going to our first theme of today's conversation, which I think you touched a little on already, is as current PhD candidates, we really feel like we're constantly encountering a lot of obstacles in our research, or especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and changing how we're researching today. But looking back on your PhD, maybe Aleksandra, if you want to go first, what were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced during your PhD, And how did you overcome them? And how did those experiences relate to some of the obstacles you overcome today in the workplace environment?
I would say the biggest obstacle I faced was as an international student at Hafencity University, which is at the time, I started in late 2010. There weren't many international students. And also the structure of the PhD was quite loose. So I did have monthly meetings with my supervisor, but the rest of the time I was pretty much on my own. So the initial phases when you're supposed to shape and refine your motivation and questions, and I felt quite alone in the process. And I would say I really struggled the first 2 years just trying. I chose a topic that was quite wide, but that needed specific questions, directions. So for the first 2 years, I struggled a lot shaping it. I would say the change that happened after that, Tuna Tashankov really made a difference when it comes to my PhD, because Tuna came on as a second advisor. So communication with Tuna and visits to the Netherlands, where she was situated at the time, really made a difference. Then I realized I did have a lot of material and ideas, and all I really needed was additional direction. So I would say my biggest obstacle was the loose framework of the PhD program. Even though we did get support and I did have good advising at Hafencity, it just wasn't enough for a young PhD student. How it relates to my current work, I think despite the struggles that I went through in the initial phases of my PhD, it does give you certain tools to become and remain more resourceful, to find different avenues to look for answers. And also I learned a lot about myself, just how do I approach PhD? How do I approach any project? I tend to work very broad, start with overanalyzing, over-researching. So struggle for me is always to zoom in and focus on 1 or 2 questions. I start off with 100 questions. So I think what I learned is to maybe change my approach a little bit, start off more modestly, and then build on the material later on. I would say that's one of the lessons that I learned.
Thank you so much for that response. And Bahar, I was wondering if you also felt that looseness in your PhD, and whether you felt the PhD was really structured, or you really had the time to explore different topics during it throughout your PhD.
For me, I think I totally agree with Aleksandra that the direction that you actually wait for someone to take your hand and actually culture you in that academic environment was a little missing. And even though I had super nice supervisors from the country, the Netherlands, and they were really lovely and helping me in any respect, it was still missing because they had, of course, busy lives and academic, both private. And it was really hard to find my way in that academic culture, I remember. And the most difficult thing, also maybe the most striking thing to me, that I was coming from a culture which was Middle East Technical University back in Ankara, Turkey, that actually I was a research assistant back in Ankara, and that life for me was basically research, work, and I was maybe defining myself through that. And there was not much difference between work and leisure, or work or other work, because I'm not saying that I was a workaholic, but work was my pleasure, that I saw it that way. And when I came here, I just had this PhD students working only from 9 to 5 and actually really being punctual back to their table in lunch times and even coffee breaks. It was a little killing the joy for me, this academic joy of sharing stuff, of having some time together and basically having the intellectual talk and having some sharing together. And that was really missing. And I also had difficulty because there were not many people working on my topic. And I felt quite isolated in that respect. And what I could add to that, I guess, is that I was an external PhD student. So many of the PhD students here are employed officially. And but I did not have that opportunity. And I had the first year's a scholarship from the Ministry of Education here in the Netherlands, but it was only for 2 years. So I had to actually sustain my financial situation. So I was looking for finances like the third and the fourth year, which put a lot of pressure because I was making grant applications and trying to make sure that I would actually be able to finish this study. So that was actually the insecurity, also financial insecurity, which put a little bit of pressure on my shoulders, I must say. And if I look at today, right now, I am still at temporary contract. So it was not, this year I was to get a permanent contract, but due to COVID, they did not give it. Another year of extension I got. So I think that this financial insecurity is still ongoing, which is quite, I mean, personally, I don't care about it right now. I think I learned to live with insecurity, which is a bit funny to say, but I love what I'm doing, and it gives me the joy of like looking at things in from a different perspective. And I know I can just do something else if not this. And I think that self-confidence and also the joy of intellectual life keeps me alive in that respect. And the second thing, when it comes to isolation, I think I turned it around in two ways. First, I am, in my approach to my students, I am trying to break that for them. And as Tuna was doing it for Aleksandra, I just had this philosophy that empathize with the student and try to break that isolation or take the hand of the student to the academic world here. And I think that's a very nice approach. And secondly, isolation for myself, when I feel isolated in any environment, I have some toolbox right now to break that isolation. I think I also learned that through the Dutch academia in a way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bahar, for that great conversation on isolation in academia. And ending on that point, I think it's the perfect segue into our second theme, networking and skills. And one of the questions we were wondering as current PhD candidates is, how did you start building networks to help your career within the industry or academia throughout your PhD? And what type of suggestions might you have for us currently completing our PhDs and doing so? And maybe I'll give it back to Bahar, since you were just talking about isolation, and maybe as a way to combat that isolation was building a network.
I think that building a network is just really the way out of that isolation. And of course, I started as many PhD students looking at the big conferences and being in places where everybody went, and like one of them being AAG, and getting lost in those huge conference venues. And at the end of the day, of course, listening, mind-opening presentations, but feeling still not well connected. It did not do the job for me, to be honest. And how I felt more connected was through making the links to other PhDs and postdocs, and also searching specifically the ones who are interested in the field that I am trying to carve my academic path. And that helped. It was not like a super like the prestigious conferences or anything of that sort that I was going in the third and the fourth year, but that actually helped me a lot more to express myself better, to be like myself in the academic conferences, and actually build some linkages with other people. And I went to a lot of summer schools. That also helped a lot, because it brings different PhD students from all over the world that comes with the same idea, not the idea, but just the same field, and looking for their path in the academia. So that was really great. At the time, there was the summer schools of RC21. I think they're still going on. And I still, 2 years ago, I applied for the Antipode summer school. And I think those, like you just need to look at what is there in your own field and try to connect with like early careers mostly. And of course, you need to go to a couple of big conferences and try to show your face here and there. But I think like feeling safe is the most important thing at the beginning, and then slowly making yourself like show your face around and present what you have, because in the first years you don't also have much to present. It really helps to build a safe environment for yourself where you can actually be fine with your not refined question and talk about it with other people. And later on, these people also become academics. Huh? I mean, I have so many friends here and there, and now they are carving their own path. But it became sort of an organic network that we know each other, that we know one is there and the other is in the other side of the world. And we try to find different ways of connecting than the most prestigious ways of connecting. I think that also is a very alternative. It takes a lot more time to build and also a lot more time to get pay off. I don't want to use that word, but to help you go somewhere. But I think in long term, it really helps to build safe and strong relations with your peers.
Yeah, thank you, Bahar, for that point, especially the network across the world, which is something I think Aleksandra could really talk about in her experience in completing a PhD in Europe and now currently being in the US. And I think it relates back to our first theme about overcoming obstacles and geographies. So I guess I'll pass it over to you to talk about how you built your network within more the industry after your PhD and how you bridged that gap from Europe to the United States.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I will just add something else to the obstacles, just building on what Bahar talked about, and then I'll segue into networks. And these 2 points are connected. I think for me personally, biggest, in addition to what I mentioned, other biggest obstacle was, of course, the financial side of it, which ultimately for me, I would say, ended my academic career. And it is connected to networks as well. You know, I think when it comes to issues that PhD students face, myself definitely, was you have all this urge and fire to work on this project. But at the time, I was quite young. I was in my mid-20s. I didn't really seriously consider how exactly am I going to execute it. I thought that the grant that I was given was enough. The grant that I was given was pretty much enough for living, not for traveling or networking or going to conferences. We were given 2 conferences, I think, per 2 or 3 years, which pretty much meant everything else was paid from our own pocket. And I think something that no one really tells you as a PhD student is the financial side of it, not just financial, but the general support, which also includes the financial support. I personally always felt torn between, as a first generation Bosnian in the US who decided to leave back to Europe with a student loan from the US. At the time, I really didn't seriously think about what am I going to do after, or how am I going to build the networks, which actually is the thing that defines your later PhD career. So coming back to your question, obviously, I'm not in academia, so I don't know if I overcame these obstacles in the most productive way. You can build networks at your university, join the project if there are any available projects. For me, it was a struggle because I was an international student who didn't speak German at the time. So the only project that I could have joined is here and there would be a project for English speaking that I could join. I did attend some conferences, I presented, but the reality is, at the end of the day, you'll be competing with people who attended the same conferences, presented papers at the same conferences, published papers. So I don't know. I don't have an advice. I think it's much easier for people with some resources to be able to travel and meet people and build those networks more productively. It's hard to build networks in a globalized world at the place where you are at only your own university. So yeah, it is hard. I think building networks is the key. It helps you later looking for postdocs, looking for jobs. University, most people don't stay at the university where they did their PhD. I didn't. At the time, there were no extra projects, no open positions. I spent about 2 years looking for a PhD position. In the end, reality was there, which is pay off your student loans. I didn't have any seed money so yeah, I got out of it kind of. I don't know what I could have done different, to be frank. I was social, I was networking, I was talking to people. My advisor was in the Netherlands. I made visit to the Netherlands. I spoke to academics who meant something in the academic world. But yeah, it is hard. despite your will to build networks and be part of the conversation and discourse. So I'm afraid I'm not sure I'm the best example when it comes to productive networking.
Well, thank you for your response for that question. And I think it goes more towards our last theme too, where we're talking about more perceptions of academia and the industry and looking forward in the future. We all know that academia is increasingly competitive. We see a lot of people apply for very few positions, and we feel like it's a very high hurdle to get into academia permanently. So we see a lot more people going into industry and finding other career routes after their PhD. So maybe one last question to end the podcast is, how did you envision your career during your PhD? And to what extent did that vision change over time? And then maybe looking towards the future now, where do you see yourself in the future, and what are some of your ambitions or future engagement that you see in academia? And maybe let's go back to Aleksandra to start it and then go to Bahar afterwards.
I mean, everybody starts their PhD thinking they'll stay in academia. I can't think of a single person I ever spoke to who said, okay, I'll get my PhD and then go back to the industry to work for a private company or government. So yeah, I think most people start with a motivation to teach or research or do both. Like them, I entered thinking, okay, this is my calling. I'll be teaching and researching, and the milieu that I encountered through PhD was the kind of people I wanted to be surrounded with. I graduated with the honors, and my project was a success. There was a book project at the end of it, publications. So in terms of, yeah, I was very positive up until the very end. And then, sorry, Andre, can you repeat the second part of the question, the expectation and the reality?
So you were talking about earlier about like your expectations in the future and throughout your PhD, how they were sort of challenged in a way. And now maybe if you want to reflect on some of your current expectations or your future engagement you'd like to have with academia, if you're still interested in engaging with academia as an industry professional, and to what extent you see and how you see academia today more from the side of the industry.
I mean, I still engage. I got my PhD in 2014, and since then I moved back to the US and I haven't worked in academia, but I still do publish. I had my own material up until, let's say, 2018, so several articles, and the book project came out of it. And then later I just did my own research using the same skill and tools and ideological lens, but applying it to other hybrid projects, such as analyzing Ken Loach's movies, and another project was a paper on Bogdanovich, who is Bogdanov, I apologize, who is a science fiction writer. So I don't know, it keeps me sane to still remain, to keep writing and producing and publishing it, even if it's 1 or 2 papers per year. This is at my own expense, but it brings a lot of joy for me. So one avenue to take is, even if you're working in another industry, you can still keep writing and producing and reading and engaging with people. And ideally, you would attend a conference or 2 per year. So there are ways you can still have your daily job and then have PhD-related activities as your hobby, which is what I've done. My outlook on academia, I don't regret doing a PhD. It made me a better person. I enjoyed those 5 years. It was probably the best time of my life, because the learning that you gain and the people that you meet, it really does make a difference. Ugly reality is there are a lot of us competing for the same positions. It's a precarious field, and unfortunately, not all of us can find jobs. And sometimes it's a matter of, for the lack of a better word, luck, just being at the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's just limitations, such as financial or obligations that you have to attend. But regardless, whatever your motivations for a PhD are, I don't think they are regrets. Wherever you end up, you do gain skills that you can apply later. I think we are quite resourceful. I think there are very general but also specific struggles we deal with as PhD students that do make you stronger. I work for the state of California now, and of course, I don't apply directly what I learned as a PhD student, but I do notice certain skills that I attained, such as I'm much better at multitasking, or research comes much easier to me, or I can think in wider terms. I can think of problems in terms of questions and answers. I can formulate research questions quicker. So yeah, you do have a lot of practical skill that you get out of it. So overall, it's a wonderful, wonderful field and career choice. And even if you don't end up in academia, you do gain a lot that you can apply in other fields.
Thank you so much for that thorough response. And maybe looking from the different lens in academia, Bahar, if you want to speak about some of those future aspirations that you had during your PhD and now looking forward in academia, what are some of your ambitions?
Okay, I can relate to what Aleksandra is saying so well. I think I never had a vision when I was doing my PhD. That is one thing. I think secretly I wanted to become a professor one day. But that was more of an admiration to intellectual figures I had mostly during my master's, the sociology department at MITU. I remember just being so astonished, intellectually astonished and lost with the lectures of some of the professors that we had. I think I had that secret wish to become a professor one day. But during my PhD, I also had a very disrupted experience. As I said, there were the financial issues and the constant struggle with that. And on the other hand, the fourth year of my PhD, I had my son. So that is the most difficult year of the PhD, that you are done with your fieldwork and you just need to analyze your data and make sense of it and write a good story about that. Of course, it wasn't so easy back then. Writing a story sounds like a, poem almost. But for me, it was really challenging to finish the PhD. I had to have another year of extension. I finished my PhD in 5 years. It had to be like that because I looked after my son. And I think during those years, I totally forgot about career ambitions. And I think that's also a very gendered experience at that life cycle, if you go through that. And after that, my endurance in the academia was just, as I said, this intellectual joy kept me in there. And my career ambition was that I just wanted to go on with research, whatever. I mean, regardless of if I find a position or not. So I just sat down. I had 1.5 years between my PhD and my postdoc. And I was just with a small kid looking after my son, basically. And I sat down and write down a Marie Curie application and also 2 other applications, 2 of which actually were successful. So I was really happy that I could just get out of that, of course, with all the financial insecurity and just keeping on for the time or till the time that you find something. And Aleksandra was saying that it just happened for me at the right time. And if I hadn't gotten that scholarship, for me, I think that was the end of academia. Basically, academia as we know it. I don't believe that the academia is just only restricted to universities or being in university. I think we are all trained or being trained on this intellectual work, and that will keep with us whatever we do. As Aleksandra was saying, that you work on these skills, you employ these skills in different parts of your life. And for me, also looking at different parts of the world where many of our colleagues are under the pressure of authoritarian regimes and all cannot actually function in their own positions, and using these tools in street academias. For me, I think the point that I am saying or becoming a bit, loose in my attachment to academia is that I don't see it as a job. I don't see it as a title. I don't see it as, I see it, this is just the thing that I love doing. And if I even don't get, I am an assistant professor, that is a title, but I am still on a temporary contract, and I hope it will change. But the way I'm looking at it is that regardless of, I get that contract or not, I will be able to do this job, and I will maybe find another job to get my food, but research will just be there for me to do it, or teaching will be there for me to do it, and that will not be changing. So in that sense, I see it as I said, a trajectory, a lifelong love for knowledge, that's it basically, like production of knowledge and getting to know how people actually are involved with this process, how they make sense of the world. I think that is just my career. That's how I see it, not only restricted to titles.
Well, Bahar and Alex, unfortunately, I think we're out of time. But I would really like to thank both of you for your honest, thoughtful, and sincere reflections on academia and industry, along with such personal statements about your trajectories and aspirations. Speaking on behalf of all the PhD candidates within UGovern, I think this podcast will be very helpful to help position ourselves and our research moving forward, and also reflect on what we want to do after we complete our degree. So once again, I would like to sincerely thank both of you on behalf of the Urban Governance Research Network for joining us today and providing the audience some thoughtful insights surrounding how to more effectively navigate academia and industry. For our listeners, please check out ugovern.eu and ugovern on social media for more information about the Research Network and our current initiatives. Once again, thank you for joining this session today, and we look forward to having you listen in on our next UGovern podcast.